Chapter 2, Mistress Mary Quite Contrary. Mary liked looking at her mother from afar, thinking she was very pretty. But Mary barely knew her, so it was hard to expect her to love her or miss her much after she died. In fact, she didn't miss her at all. Mary was a self-centered child, so she only ever thought about herself. An older child would have been worried about being left alone in the world, but Mary was very young. She'd always been looked after, so she just assumed she always would be. What she really wanted to know was if she was going to nice people. Would they be polite to her and let her have her own way, just like her ayah and the other local servants used to? Mary knew she wouldn't be staying long at the English clergyman's house where she was first taken. She didn't want to stay there anyway. The clergyman was poor. He had 5 children, all close in age, who wore worn-out clothes. They were always fighting and grabbing toys from each other. Mary hated their messy bungalow. She was so unpleasant to the children that after a day or two, no one would play with her. By the second day, they'd given her a nickname that made her absolutely furious. Basil was the one who thought of it first. He was a little boy with cheeky blue eyes and a turned-up nose, and Mary hated him. She was playing alone under a tree, just like she had been the day the cholera epidemic started. She was making little mounds of earth and paths for a garden. Basil came and stood nearby to watch her. Soon, he got quite interested and suddenly made a suggestion.
Why don't you put a pile of stones there and pretend it's a rock garden?
He asked.
Right there in the middle.
He leaned over her to point. Go away. Mary yelled. I don't want boys around. Go away. For a moment, Basil looked angry. Then he started to tease her. He was always teasing his sisters. He danced around her, made faces, sang, and laughed.
Mistress Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells, and marigolds all in a row.
He sang it until the other children heard and started laughing too. The angrier Mary got, the more they sang Mistress Mary, quite contrary. After that, for as long as she stayed with them, they called her Mistress Mary, quite contrary. They used it when they talked about her, and often when they spoke directly to her.
You're going to be sent home.
Basil told her.
At the end of the week, and we're glad about it.
I am glad about it too. Mary replied. Where is home?
She doesn't even know where home is.
Basil said with the scorn only a 7-year-old can manage.
It's England, of course. Our grandma lives there and our sister Mabel was sent to her last year. You're not going to your grandma. You don't have one. You're going to your uncle. His name is Mr. Archibald Craven.
I don't know anything about him. Mary snapped.
I know you don't.
Basil replied.
You don't know anything. Girls never do. I heard Mom and Dad talking about him. He lives in a huge, lonely old house in the countryside. No one goes near him. He's so grumpy he won't let anyone, and they wouldn't come even if he did. He's a hunchback and he's awful.
I don't believe you. Mary said. She turned her back and stuck her fingers in her ears, refusing to listen anymore. But she thought about it a lot afterward. That night, when Mrs. Crawford told her she would sail to England in a few days to live with her uncle, Mr. Archibald Craven, at Misselthwaite Manor, Mary looked so cold and stubbornly uninterested that they didn't know what to make of her. They tried to be kind, but Mary just turned her face away when Mrs. Crawford tried to kiss her. She held herself stiffly when Mr. Crawford patted her shoulder.
She's such a plain child.
Mrs. Crawford said with pity afterward.
And her mother was such a beautiful woman. She had such charming manners, too. Mary, though, has the most unappealing ways I've ever seen in a child. The children call her Mistress Mary quite contrary, and even though it's naughty of them, you can't help but understand why. Perhaps if her mother had brought her pretty face and charming manners into the nursery more often, Mary might have learned some nice ways, too. It's very sad, now that the poor beautiful woman is gone, to think that many people never even knew she had a child. I believe she hardly ever looked at her.
Mrs. Crawford sighed.
When her ayah died, there was no one to even think about the poor little thing. Imagine the servants running away and leaving her all alone in that empty bungalow. Colonel McGrew said he nearly jumped out of his skin when he opened the door and found her standing by herself in the middle of the room.
Mary made the long journey to England under the care of an officer's wife. The wife was taking her own children to a boarding school. The officer's wife was completely focused on her own son and daughter. She was quite happy to hand Mary over to the woman Mr. Archibald Craven sent to meet her in London. This woman was Mrs. Medlock, the housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor. She was a plump woman with very red cheeks and sharp black eyes. She wore a very purple dress, a black silk cape with jet fringe, and a black bonnet with purple velvet flowers that stood up and trembled when she moved her head. Mary didn't like her at all, but since Mary rarely liked anyone, that wasn't surprising. Plus, it was clear Mrs. Medlock didn't think much of Mary either.
My goodness, she's a plain little thing.
She said.
And Wed heard her mother was a beauty. She hasn't passed much of that on, has she, Mom? Perhaps she'll improve as she gets older.
The officer's wife said kindly.
If she weren't so pale and had a nicer expression, her features are actually quite good. Children change so much. She'll have to change a lot.
Mrs. Medlock replied.
And if you ask me, there's nothing at Misselthwaite that's likely to improve children.
They thought Mary wasn't listening. She was standing a little apart from them by the window of the private hotel they were staying at. She was watching the buses, cabs, and people passing by, but she heard everything clearly. She became very curious about her uncle and the place he lived. What kind of place was it? What would he be like? What was a hunchback? She'd never seen one. Maybe there weren't any in India. Since she'd been living in other people's houses and no longer had an ayah, she started to feel lonely. She also began to have strange new thoughts. She started to wonder why she never seemed to belong to anyone, even when her parents were alive. Other children seemed to belong to their parents, but she never felt like she was truly anyone's little girl. She had servants, food, and clothes, but no one ever paid her any real attention. She didn't know this was because she was an unpleasant child. But then, of course, she didn't know she was unpleasant. She often thought other people were disagreeable, but she didn't realize she was herself. Mary thought Mrs. Medlock was the most unpleasant person she'd ever seen. Her face was ordinary and ruddy, and her fancy bonnet was just as common. The next day, when they set out for Yorkshire, Mary walked through the station to the train carriage with her head held high. She tried to keep as far away from Mrs. Medlock as possible. She didn't want to seem like she belonged to her. It would have made her furious if people thought she was Mrs. Medlock's little girl. But Mrs. Medlock wasn't bothered by Mary or her thoughts at all. She was the kind of woman who wouldn't stand for any nonsense from young ones. At least, that's what she would have said if anyone had asked her. She hadn't wanted to go to London, especially since her sister Maria's daughter was getting married. But she had a comfortable, well-paid job as housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor. The only way to keep it was to immediately do whatever Mr. Archibald Craven told her. She never even dared to ask a question.
Captain Lennox and his wife died of cholera.
Mr. Craven had said in his short, cold way.
Captain Lennox was my wife's brother, and I am their daughter's guardian. The child needs to be brought here. You must go to London and bring her yourself.
So she packed her small trunk and made the trip. Mary sat in her corner of the train carriage, looking plain and grumpy. She had nothing to read or look at. Her thin, black-gloved hands were folded in her lap. Her black dress made her look even paler than usual. Her limp, light hair straggled out from under her black crepe hat. Chapter 3: Across the Moor. Mary slept for a long time. When she finally woke up, Mrs. Medlock had bought a lunch basket at one of the stations. They ate chicken, cold beef, bread and butter, and drank hot tea. Outside, the rain poured down harder than ever, and everyone on the platform wore wet, shiny raincoats. The train guard lit the lamps in their compartment, and Mrs. Medlock cheered up considerably as she ate. She ate a hearty meal and soon fell asleep. Mary sat watching her, staring as the woman's fine bonnet slipped to one side, until Mary herself drifted off to sleep again in the corner of the carriage, lulled by the steady patter of rain against the glass. It was pitch black when she woke up next. The train had stopped at a station, and Mrs. Medlock was shaking her shoulder.
"You've had quite a sleep,"
she said.
"Time to wake up. We're at Thwaite Station and we have a long drive ahead of us."
Mary stood up and tried to keep her eyes open while Mrs. Medlock gathered her packages. The little girl didn't offer to help. In India, the servants had always carried everything, and she took it for granted that others would wait on her. The station was small, and they seemed to be the only passengers getting off. The station master spoke to Mrs. Medlock in a gruff but friendly voice, pronouncing his words with a broad, unusual accent that Mary would later learn was Yorkshire.
"I see you've got back.
He said.
And you've brought the young one with you."
"Yes, that's her."
Mrs. Medlock replied, adopting a bit of the local accent herself, as she nodded over her shoulder toward Mary.
"How's your wife?"
"Well enough. The carriage is waiting outside for you."
A horse-drawn carriage stood waiting on the road just outside the small platform. Mary noticed that it was an elegant carriage, and the footman who helped her inside was smart and well-dressed. His long raincoat and the waterproof cover on his hat were shiny and dripping wet. In fact, everything was soaked, including the stocky station master. Once the footman shut the door and climbed up to sit next to the driver, they started off. Mary sat back in the comfortable, cushioned corner of the carriage, but she didn't feel like sleeping anymore. Instead, she stared out the window, curious to see the road leading to the strange place Mrs. Medlock had described. She wasn't a timid child, and she wasn't exactly scared, but she couldn't help feeling uneasy. There was no telling what might happen in a house with 100 closed-up rooms, standing right on the edge of a lonely moor. "What is a moor?" she asked Mrs. Medlock suddenly.
"Look out the window in about 10 minutes and you'll see."
The woman answered.
"We have to drive 5 miles across Missel Moor before we reach the manor. You won't see much because it's a dark night, but you'll see something."
Mary didn't ask any more questions. She waited quietly in her dark corner, keeping her eyes fixed on the window. The carriage lamps cast narrow beams of light ahead, letting her catch fleeting glimpses of their surroundings. After leaving the station, they drove through a tiny village, where she saw whitewashed cottages and the warm glow of a local pub. Then they passed a church, a vicarage, and a few small cottage shop windows displaying toys, sweets, and various odds and ends. Soon they reached the main highway, where she could see hedges and trees. After that, the landscape didn't seem to change for a long time, or at least, it felt like a very long time to her. Finally, the horses began to slow down as if they were climbing a hill, and soon the hedges and trees vanished. In fact, she could see nothing but deep, heavy darkness on either side. She leaned forward and pressed her face against the glass just as the carriage gave a violent jolt.
"Well, we're on the moor now, sure enough,"
Mrs. Medlock said. The carriage lamps cast a yellow glow onto a rough, unpaved road. It seemed to cut through low bushes and wild shrubs that stretched out into the vast, dark emptiness ahead. A wind was rising, making a strange, wild, low rushing sound. It's not the sea, is it?" Mary asked, looking over at her companion.
"No, it's not.
Mrs. Medlock answered.
And it's not fields or mountains either. It's just miles and miles of wild, open land where nothing grows but heather, gorse and wild shrubs, and nothing lives but wild ponies and sheep."
"It feels like it could be the sea, if only there were water," Mary said. "It sounds just like the ocean right now."
"That's just the wind blowing through the bushes,"
Mrs. Medlock said.
"It's a wild, gloomy place if you ask me, though plenty of people love it, especially when the heather is in bloom."
They drove on and on through the darkness. Although the rain had stopped, the wind howled and whistled, making eerie noises. The road wound up and down, and several times they crossed small bridges where water rushed noisily underneath. Mary felt as if the drive would never end. To her, the vast, bleak moor felt like a black ocean, and they were crossing it on a narrow strip of dry land. "I don't like it," she said to herself. "I don't like it." She pressed her thin lips tightly together. The horses were climbing a steep stretch of road when Mary first spotted a light. Mrs. Medlock saw it at the same time and let out a long sigh of relief.
"Oh, I am glad to see that little light twinkling.
She exclaimed.
That's the light from the gatehouse window. We'll at least get a nice cup of tea in a little while."
It took a little while, just as she had said. Once the carriage passed through the park gates, they still had to drive down a 2-mile avenue. The trees met overhead, making it feel as if they were driving through a long, dark tunnel. Finally, they emerged from the dark tunnel into an open space and stopped in front of a very long, low-built house that seemed to stretch around a stone courtyard. At first, Mary thought there were no lights in any of the windows. But as she got out of the carriage, she noticed a dull glow coming from a single upstairs corner room. The entrance door was massive, made of thick, heavy oak panels studded with large iron nails and bound with heavy iron bars. It opened into a grand, enormous hall. The lighting was so dim that the faces in the portraits on the walls and the silent figures in suits of armor made Mary uneasy, and she avoided looking at them. Standing on the cold stone floor, she looked like a tiny, strange figure in her black clothes, and she felt just as small, lost, and out of place as she looked. A tidy, thin old man stood near the butler, who had opened the door for them.
"You are to take her to her room."
He said in a low, gravelly voice.
"He does not want to see her. He is leaving for London in the morning."
"Very well, Mr. Pitcher.
Mrs. Medlock replied.
As long as I know what is expected of me, I can handle it."
"What is expected of you, Mrs. Medlock?"
Mr. Pitcher said.
"Is that you make sure he isn't disturbed, and that he doesn't see anyone or anything he doesn't want to see."
Mary Lennox was then led up a wide staircase, down a long hallway, up a short flight of steps, and through several more corridors. Finally, a door opened, and she found herself in a room with a warm fire crackling in the fireplace and supper waiting on a table. Mrs. Medlock said bluntly,
"Well, here you are. This room and the next one are where you'll be living, and you must stay in them. Don't you forget that."
This was how Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, and she had probably never felt so sour and stubborn in all her life.